Hey there, it's Wendy from Worldwide Speak. I want to talk to you today about the semicolon. The semicolon is a type of punctuation that we use in English that a lot of people don't know how to use correctly when they're beginning to learn how to write in English. In this video, I'm going to go over some ways that we use the semicolon, and I'm going to give you examples of how to use it specifically. And at the end, stick around because there's going to be a quiz to see how much you learned. Thank you, and let's learn. So you may be thinking, the semicolon, what is that? Well, if you can see in the picture with the circle, it looks like a period and on top of a comma. And we don't use this super often when we're writing in English, but it's really important for you to know how to use it in order to improve your writing skills in English and take your writing to the next level. We use it in different ways, but specifically in this video, I'm going to talk about 4 different ways. I'm going to talk about how it links 2 sentences, how it's used with certain transitional expressions, how it can clear up confusion when we have a list, and then also how it can add variety to your writing. Let's take a look at this first one next. Okay, the first use of the semicolon that I'd like to explain is that of linking. So you can use the semicolon to connect 2 complete sentences or 2 independent clauses. Those sentences can stand alone. The first sentence ends in a period and the second sentence ends in a period. But these 2 sentences are so closely related that you can link them together with a semicolon, and this shows the reader that even though the sentences can stand alone, there's connection, and you want to emphasize that connection. All right, so this first usage of the semicolon that I'm talking about, the linking, let's see what this looks like in real life. I'd like to give you some examples so you know exactly how we use this with 2 complete sentences. So take this sentence we have here. It's cold outside. I think I'll wear my jacket. So those are 2 complete sentences. They're standing alone. They each end in a period. But these 2 sentences are related to each other. Since it's cold outside, I'm going to wear my jacket. Those 2 things are definitely related, very closely related, in fact. So what we can do is we can remove the period from the first sentence, and we can replace it with a semicolon because those 2 sentences are so closely related. It's cold outside, semicolon, I think I'll wear my jacket. Let's take a look at another one. There is an exam tomorrow. We'd better study a lot. You bet those sentences are related, right? When you have an exam, you definitely want to study. So though, again, I have 2 sentences here. They're separated by a period, right? The first sentence ends in a period. The second sentence ends in a period. And if we're going to use the semicolon to show this relationship, to show that they're closely related, we're going to take the period out of the first sentence and we're going to put a semicolon in because they are closely related. There's an exam and we'd better study. Let's take a look at this last sentence. Xavier is at the beach. My flight was canceled. These 2 sentences are good sentences. They're standing alone. They end in periods, but they have nothing to do with each other at all. Just because Xavier's at the beach, that has absolutely nothing to do with my flight being canceled. So there is no way I can add a semicolon to these 2 sentences because they're not closely related. All right, the second usage I want to talk about is the semicolon when it's used with transition expressions. We have adverbs such as however, therefore, similarly, and there are a lot others. I just gave you 3 examples here. And also with transitional phrases like, for example, in addition, on the other hand. Again, there are more of these transitional phrases, but I have just included 3 for you here so you can get an idea of the type of transition expressions I'm talking about. Let's take a look at what this usage looks like when we put it into practice. Let's go through a couple of examples together. All right, we have 2 sentences here. The best hotel in Chicago is the Drake. In the second sentence, however, it's booked for the nights you have requested. I see a transition word there. I see the word however. Now we know that these 2 sentences are closely related and we have a transition word. Let's see what this looks like when we add a semicolon. You note that we've taken the period away after the first sentence and we replaced it with a semicolon. Right there you can see the best hotel in Chicago is the Drake, semicolon, which is before the transition word however, and then we still keep that comma after our transition word. So you can see we have a semicolon instead of a period, and we still keep that comma after the transition word. So now we have a very long sentence with a transition word and a semicolon before that transition word. Let's take a look at another example. My dog is so smart. For example, she learned how to turn the door handle to let herself out. Now, what is this going to look like if we use a semicolon? Because I see here we have that transitional phrase, for example, and then we have a comma, right? That first sentence ends in a period. What if we wanted to combine those 2 and use the semicolon? What would that look like? We would take out the period after the first sentence. We would replace it with a semicolon. We would keep that transition word. And then, of course, we would keep that comma after the transition word. So you see here, we have my dog is so smart, semicolon. For example, comma, she learned how to turn the door handle to let herself out, period. One long, complex sentence using the semicolon before a transition word or a transition expression. Sometimes it's important to use the semicolon when we have a long list of things and there are just too many commas. This is how people feel when there are too many commas. It gets overwhelming and difficult to discern or understand or be able to tell which information is separate from the other information. What do I mean? Let's take a look at some examples of this so you have a complete understanding of why we would use the semicolon instead of the comma when we have a list. Okay, here I have a sentence. The top 3 runners are Noelle Nelson, Nancy McNeil, and Vanessa Cunningham. It's easy. You know that the top 3 runners are 3 different people, first and last name. So each person is separated by a comma. That's pretty easy to read and understand. It's not confusing. Well, what happens if we add where they're from? So what if the sentence read something like this? The top 3 runners are Noelle Nelson from Austin, Texas, Nancy McNeil from San Diego, California, and Vanessa Cunningham from Chicago, Illinois. Okay, it's a little more confusing. Let's take a look at how many commas we've got here. It's comma crazy in this sentence. We've got one between the city and the state, Austin, Texas. We've got another comma separating Noelle from Nancy. We have another comma separating San Diego from California, the city from the state. And then we have another comma separating Nancy from Vanessa, who is from Chicago, comma, Illinois. That's a lot of commas in one sentence. And we might not be able to differentiate those 3 entities, Noelle, Nancy, and Vanessa, because there are too many commas. And we really want to make sure that those 3 people are distinct or separate things in the sentence, and that the reader understands this well. This is where that super semicolon comes into play. We use it when we are separating the 3 things that we're listing, or 4 things, or 5 things, whatever. So it would look like this. The top 3 runners are Noelle Nelson from Austin, Texas, semicolon after the first runner. Nancy McNeil from San Diego, California, semicolon. And Vanessa Cunningham from Chicago, Illinois. Do you see how we took out the commas that are between the things and we replaced them with the semicolon? That signals to your reader, oh, wait a minute, this is a separate entity from the next thing. I read one thing, I see that semicolon, I realize, okay, this is a list, and here comes the next thing in that list. So we use that semicolon in lists when there are just too many commas, because it can be confusing. And this way, this insertion of the semicolon signals to your reader and clears up any confusion between the items in a list. All right, and the last usage of the semicolon that I'd like to talk about is style. Everybody has their own style when they write, and especially when you, the English language learner, is beginning to develop your own style when you write, you might want to try to use a semicolon here or there to add variety to your sentences. We also have this joining of sentences using the semicolon so that it can break up your writing a little bit and it can show a higher level of grammar. Let's take a look at this in action. So we have these sentences here. Yesterday, Lucia went to visit her best friend, Elsa. She works at the local ice cream shop. They have the most delicious flavor combinations. One of those is mango coconut. That is Lucia's favorite flavor. So these sentences are all grammatically correct, yet they are all simple sentences. It can be a little choppy in your writing, or maybe a little boring or monotonous if you're constantly using simple sentences. Let's change a couple of these sentences so that we add a semicolon and we can add variety to our writing. Now, I think that it would be nice if we could also include a transition phrase in one of these sentences so that it can be more specific. What if we did this? Yesterday, Lucia went to visit her best friend, Elsa. She works at the local ice cream shop. They have the most delicious flavor combinations. Semicolon. For instance, comma, one of those is mango coconut. That is Lucia's favorite flavor. Do you see what I did there? I started out with a couple of simple sentences, which is fine. And then I took two sentences that were closely related and I used a transitional expression, for example, to show a detail. And then I took that semicolon and I put it in between the two sentences to make a more complex sentence and to add variety to my writing. So doesn't look just like a list of simple sentences. I do want to make a note about the semicolon, and that is a little bit goes a long way. Think of it like hot chili peppers, right? You just need a little bit to spice up your dish. You don't need to use 15, 20 hot peppers to get your point across. You want to use the semicolon sparingly. Think about it in terms of the peppers. You want to sprinkle, you don't want to pour. It would just be too much and too visually distracting or visually confusing if you used a semicolon in every other sentence. You want to use it to show that you have a higher level of grammatical understanding, that you add variety to your sentences, or that you clear up any confusion. But just be careful. Use it, but use it sparingly. All right, you've made it to the end. Let's test your knowledge. The semicolon quiz. Are you ready? Here we go. Number 1. Running can be a social sport. For example, there are many running clubs that offer group runs and workouts. Is this correct or incorrect? This is incorrect. What's the problem? Well, right there. I see that transition word, and I see the end of one independent clause or one complete sentence, but there's a comma there, and that won't work. It needs to be a semicolon because you're joining two sentences together and you've got that transition word. So you know if you're going to join them together, you've got to have that semicolon. All right, let's take a look at the next one. You ready? Here we go. Spencer's birthday is tomorrow. Let's surprise him. Correct or incorrect? You did it. It's correct. Spencer's birthday is tomorrow, semicolon, let's surprise him. They're both closely related and they're both complete sentences and you joined them with a semicolon. Excellent. Another one. Galway is one of my favorite cities. I would love to go to the beach. Correct or incorrect? This is incorrect. Galway is one of my favorite cities. That's great. But what does that have to do with going to the beach? Nothing, right? Absolutely nothing. You cannot use a semicolon with two sentences that are not related. It just won't work. One more. Training for a marathon is time-consuming. Similarly, so is studying to take the entrance exam for law school. Well, this is correct. I used the semicolon before the transition word. I have the comma after the transition word, and the two sentences are closely related. So how'd you do? I bet you did pretty well. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn with us. And if you like what you saw, please remember to hit the like button. And always, if you're enjoying this content and you find it useful, please consider subscribing. When you subscribe, it helps us get this information to many more people learning English just like you throughout the world. And for even more resources when it comes to learning English, please visit our website at worldwidespeak.com. Again, thank you so much. Take care.